When Pavel was sent to a boarding school in the rural town of Pazardzhik, no one imagined that he would never return. What seemed like just another temporary transfer during the chaos of post-communist Bulgaria turned into one of the region's darkest and most hushed-up cases. Inspired by real stories and the silence of institutions forgotten by the state, this story is a breathtaking mystery. What happens when children disappear, and no one wants to know why? This video will move you. Watch until the end and find out why I was never the same again. My name is Elena, and no matter how many years have passed, I have never been able to talk about what happened to my brother without my voice shaking. It was the summer of 1998, and I was 14. He was 12. Pavel was my best friend, my protector, my entire world. And at that time, after the fall of the regime, Bulgaria still lived in shadows. Shadows that lurked in places like the Pazardzhik boarding school. Our mother raised us alone after our father left. And when she became seriously ill, the state decided that we could no longer keep her. That was when we were separated. I was taken to a foster home in Plovdiv, but Pavel was sent to the state boarding school in Pazardzhik. They said it would be temporary, until someone could take care of us. But no one came. And Pavel never came back. At first, he would send me letters, handwritten, in neat, careful handwriting. He would talk about the older boys who scared him to sleep, about the strange smell in the cafeteria, about the noises at night that no one could explain. But he would always end by saying, "I'm fine. Don't worry about me." And I wanted to believe him. The last letter I received from him was on September 26th. It was a neatly folded sheet of paper in a pale blue envelope. He said that his bed had been moved, that he now slept near the second-floor window, and that he could hear things outside. Footsteps, muffled laughter, someone whispering his name. "I think someone comes in here at night, but I don't know how. My shoes are wet in the morning." It chilled me to the core, but no one would listen. No one wanted to hear a teenage girl talk about being scared and shivering. When I wrote back, the letter came back to me, sealed with a red stripe. Addressee unknown. 2 weeks later, we got the news. A government official arrived at the shelter with a manila envelope and a look on his face that I have never forgotten. He called the headmistress and whispered something in her ear. Then she called me into a secluded room, sat down across from me, and said without blinking, "Your brother has disappeared. We think he ran away from the boarding school." I didn't say anything in response. I didn't cry. I just felt as if something had been ripped out of me. The police said he probably jumped over the wall at night and tried to hitchhike to find me. That children ran away all the time, especially at that time, and that he was most likely hiding in some village. But I knew Pavel would never do that without telling me. He always left signs. He always told me everything. 3 weeks later, they called off the search. But I didn't. I never did. And then, in late October, something happened. A former boarding school employee, a man named Todor Ivanov, showed up at the door of the foster home. He was holding an old, dirty notebook with a torn cover. "I found this among the radiators in the dormitory on the second floor," he said. "It's in your brother's name." When I touched the notebook, something inside me shivered. I knew it was Pavel's. I would recognize that handwriting anywhere. And as I began to flip through it, a cold sensation ran through me. The first few pages looked normal. Lists of assignments, dates, teachers' names. But after a few pages, everything changed. He wrote with urgency, as if he didn't want to forget what he had seen. He described someone, or something, that came into the room while everyone else was asleep. He said he couldn't see their face, but that their presence was heavy, suffocating, and that every time he woke up, something was out of place. His belongings were disturbed. His bed was wet, and a note in his coat pocket, in writing that wasn't his, saying, "You'll be next." I took it to the police, but they laughed at me. They said it was a child's overactive imagination. The headmistress of the boarding school denied everything. She said Pavel was unstable, troubled, full of fantasies. But I knew something was going on in that place. Something hidden. Something no one wanted to reveal. The following week, I was allowed to visit the boarding school. I went alone, without telling anyone. I wanted to see for myself where my brother had slept. The building was gray and run down, with peeling walls and a musty smell. The hallways seemed endless, and the eyes of the younger students followed my steps in absolute silence. When I asked for Pavel's room, a staff member pointed me to the stairs without saying a word. On the second floor, I found the window he had mentioned in his letters. It was small, but it looked out onto the backyard, and there were marks on the window frame, marks made with some sharp object, as if someone had been counting the days. And on the floor, between the cracks in the loose boards, I found something that made me shiver, a strip of cloth with his initials hand-embroidered on it. P.I. Someone had hidden it there, someone who knew what had happened. And I was about to discover that the silence of that place was deeper than I had imagined, and that the corridors of the boarding school hid more than cold walls and forgotten students. I came down from Pavel's room with the embroidered ribbon clutched in my hand. It felt like time was standing still there. The faces were pale, the voices almost non-existent. No one was smiling. When I returned to the ground floor, I saw that the employee who had shown me the stairs was watching from a distance, as if she wanted to speak, but something was stopping her. I tried to get closer. She turned her head away. "Have you seen what you wanted?" she said, without looking me in the eye. I said yes, but that I had questions. She didn't answer. She just picked up the cloth she used to clean the table and rubbed it harder than necessary. And then she whispered, "Here, anyone who asks too many questions disappears." I returned to the shelter with a lump in my throat. That night, I read every page of that notebook again. There were scribbled, barely legible passages where Pavel had drawn what looked like a door. Not a normal door, but a door behind another. A rectangle drawn inside a rectangle, with sentences written underneath. The iron one is fake. The real one only opens if you close your eyes. No one comes back from the other side. That night, I had nightmares. I dreamed of the empty boarding school, of hallways that repeated themselves, of a light flashing, and of someone calling me by a name that wasn't mine. The next morning, I decided to go to the Pazardzhik police station. The chief inspector was a large man with thinning hair who seemed to be carrying the weight of decades on his shoulders. I showed him the notebook, told him about the room, and the strip of cloth. He leafed through it with disinterest, as if he had seen many such cases before. When I finished, he sighed and said, "Do you know how many boys disappeared from boarding schools like this in the 1990s? Do you know how many were actually searched for? You were lucky. They found a notebook." I remained silent. He continued, "The boarding school files are confidential. There have been complaints, yes, abuse, neglect, perhaps even worse. But nothing has been proven. And the government wants to forget that part of the story." As I left the police station, a woman approached me on the corner. She was thin, her hair tied in a bun, and she had an uneasy expression on her face. "You're Pavel's sister, aren't you?" she said. I was startled. She looked around, as if someone was watching her. "My name is Elena. I worked in the kitchen at the boarding school back then. Your brother, he wasn't like the others. He asked questions. He drew things on napkins. Once he gave me a note saying he heard footsteps coming from the basement. But there was no staircase to the basement in that building. When I told the principal about it, he told me to shut up. He said Pavel was too imaginative, and that kind of boy was trouble. I asked her if she knew more. She hesitated. She said that after a rainy night, Pavel had appeared, his clothes covered in mud and shivering. She said that he had gone down there, and that he had seen boys that no one else had seen. Boys who didn't speak, didn't move, just stared. And that one of them, with very light eyes, had pulled him by the arm and whispered, "You're next." Anelia said that she thought Pavel had a fever, but when she tried to call the nurse, he had disappeared for hours. When she returned, she simply said, "They're testing me." I asked her to take me to the place where it had happened. She refused. "I won't go back there, not even if I die." I insisted. I begged. Then she wrote an address on a piece of paper and said, "There's a map in his notebook. Look for the 3 broken windows. Behind them was a sealed door, but don't try to open it yourself." I took the paper and went back to Plovdiv. That night I didn't sleep. I kept comparing Pavel's scribbles with the floor plan I found in an old newspaper that showed renovations to the boarding schools. There was, indeed, a disused area in the basement. An old wing, used before the 1980s, where a psychiatric ward had been located when the place was still a juvenile detention center. I began to put it all together like a puzzle. Pavel's stories about voices, the wet shoes, the bed that had been moved, the hidden notebook, the door behind the door, the old wing. Everything indicated that there was something under that building, something that someone, or many people, wanted to hide, and that was where I needed to go. But before that, I decided to try to locate someone who had been with my brother at that time. After days of calling institutions and cross-referencing names with public records, I managed to find one. Georgi Petrov, a former boarding school student, now living in a village near the Serbian border. I took a train there. The journey was long and silent. I carried the notebook close to my chest, as if it were the last living part of my brother. Georgi was a thin man with an aged face, even though he was in his early 30s. When I opened the door to his house and said Pavel's name, he froze. His eyes filled with tears. He silently invited me in. The house was simple, with old furniture and a strong smell of tobacco. We sat down. He didn't say anything, just stared at the cover of his notebook. After several long minutes, he murmured, "Pavel didn't run away. He was taken." My heart raced. I asked him what he meant by that. He said that at the boarding school there was a kind of list passed around by the older boys. No one knew where it came from. Every month, a new name would appear, and that name meant that one morning, the person would disappear. It was a secret kept by everyone out of sheer fear. It was like a curse, a pact. If you spoke, you were next. He said that 2 nights before Pavel disappeared, he saw his name written on a piece of paper taped to the back of the bathroom mirror, and that, on the same spot, someone had written in dried blood, "Silence or punishment." He never told anyone about it. Only now, after so many years, did he find the courage. I asked him who did it, who wrote the names. He replied, "The whole school did it. Everyone let it happen. That's how we survived." I walked home shaking. But now there was no doubt. Pavel had been the victim of something sick, perhaps organized, and someone still knew the truth. And now I was on the trail too. I knew the names. I knew the door. And now I wanted to know what was behind it, even if it meant not going back. The next day I bought a flashlight and a pair of thick gloves and went back to Pazardzhik. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask for help. By then, I knew that no one would come with me, and that if I told anyone what I was about to do, they would try to stop me. The train arrived late in the afternoon, and I waited until nightfall. I walked through the empty streets until I reached the back of the boarding school. The wall was high, but it was already cracked in several places. I found a loose section where the stones had been removed and entered it quietly. I followed Georgie's instructions. On the west side of the building was a row of 3 broken windows covered with old newspaper. Next to them, a rusty gate hid a low metal door. This was the entrance to the old wing. The door was chained shut, but the lock was weak. I used an iron bar to force it open. When the chain fell, the sound of metal echoed through the courtyard. I waited in silence, listening for any movement. Nothing. I turned on my flashlight and walked down a narrow concrete staircase covered in cobwebs and mold. The smell was unbearable, a mixture of sewage and something else, something that reminded me of something rotten and abandoned. The air was heavy. My footsteps echoed, even when I tried to tread lightly. And then I was in the main hallway of the underground wing. The walls were peeling, with claw marks or deep scratches. Some tiles were loose, and dark stains covered the floor. To the left was a rotting wooden door marked Containment Room 3B. To the right was another door, made of iron, ajar. I went inside. Inside, there were rusty iron beds, with leather straps attached to the corners. The windows were small, almost non-existent. But what caught my attention was what had been drawn on the walls. Faces. Lots of faces. Scribbled with fingernails. In the raw cement. Some were smiling. Others were crying. Some had faded eyes. Others had no mouth. And in the center of the largest wall, there was a phrase written in Old Bulgarian. Te glad, no see, Urain, no govorit. They see, but they do not perceive. They hear, but they do not speak. I left the room with my heart beating like a drum in my chest. I walked down 2 more hallways until I reached the end, where there was a double door, locked with an old-fashioned latch. On the wall next to it, there was a button. I didn't touch it. Instead, I scanned the floor. And there, I found something that stopped me in my tracks. A notebook just like Pavel's. Same cover, same size. But this one was empty, as if it had been left there for the next person. I sat on the cold floor, trying to make sense of it. And that was when I heard the sound. A crack, like wood creaking. Then, slow footsteps. Someone was walking there. Someone who wasn't me. I turned off the flashlight. I held my breath. The sound was getting closer. Regular, slow footsteps. As if whoever was walking knew exactly where they were going. I hid behind an old stretcher. The sound passed by. A shadow crossed the hallway. And then it stopped. It stood still for several minutes. And then it was gone. I waited a little longer before moving. When I was sure I was alone, I left and went back to the stairs. But before I could go up, I heard another sound. Something metallic scraping against the floor. And then, a whisper. Elena? My name. Someone whispered my name there, and there was no one there but me. I ran. I stumbled up the stairs, scratching my hand on the wall to get out. I only stopped running when I reached the station. I sat down on the cold bench on the platform and cried for the first time in years. It wasn't just fear. It was confirmation. What Pavel wrote wasn't a metaphor. It wasn't an invention. It was real. Something or someone knew the names. And now, they knew mine too. I returned to Plovdiv with a fever. I spent 2 days without getting out of bed. I dreamed of corridors, of voices, of my brother's name echoing in endless echoes. When I felt better, I picked up the notebook again. There was a drawing I hadn't noticed before. A circle with several lines coming out of it, like a sun. And next to it, a date, November 15th. There were 3 days left. I went to the public library. I rummaged through old newspaper archives, microfilms, records. And there, I found something that made me freeze. On November 15th, 1974, 5 boys disappeared from the same boarding school. All the same age, all from the same floor. The case was hushed up. They claimed a mass escape. None of them was ever found. And further down, in the footer of the old report, a name among those involved in the administration at the time, Todor Ivanov, the same person who years later would hand me Pavel's notebook. I went to Todor Ivanov's house that same day. I couldn't wait any longer. His name in the old files, directly linked to the case of the 5 missing people in 1974, changed everything. He wasn't just a retired civil servant who found Pavel's notebook. He was part of the story from the very beginning, and I had to know why. The house was on a cobblestone street, far from the center of Pazardzhik, an old 2-story house with peeling paint and boarded-up windows. I rang the doorbell once, twice. Nothing. I knocked on the door. Silence. Just as I was about to leave, a low, hoarse voice answered from behind the door. "You shouldn't be here, girl." It was him. I said my name. I said Pavel's name. And then I heard the key turn. The door opened slowly. Todor was different from when I first saw him. Thinner, more stooped, with dark circles under his eyes, and eyes that seemed always fixed on a point in the past. He let me in without saying a word. We sat in silence until he himself began to speak. "You found the lower part, didn't you?" "The basement." I nodded. He sighed. That wasn't part of the original design for the boarding school. It was a behavioral observation center built in the 60s, for youths deemed dangerous by the regime. It was secret. Everything that went on down there was supervised by government psychologists who tested the limits of emotional endurance. Isolation, sleep deprivation, stimulus control, Punishment for silence. He paused for a long time. The wing was officially shut down in '76, but it was never really sealed off. And Pavel? What did they do to him? I asked. He looked down at the floor. I don't know. When I started working there in the '90s, that floor was already off limits. But sometimes at night we would hear noises, like doors opening, footsteps, voices. They said it was the building settling, but I knew better. I revealed that someone still used the basement, that there were lists, that boys were disappearing. He closed his eyes. It's like a cursed inheritance. No one takes responsibility, but no one stops. The structure remained. The silence remained, and the fear that never went away. He then handed me a small wooden box. He said he had kept it for over 20 years. I wasn't sure if I would ever have the courage to open it again, but I think the time has come. Inside were black and white photos of boys who looked very much like Pavel. They were always in empty rooms, staring at the camera with expressions of pure panic. On the back of one of the photos was a handwritten sentence. The experiment continues. Generations change, but the method remains. There was also a cassette tape. I returned home with the box under my arm. In Plovdiv, I used an old tape recorder to listen to the tape. The audio was muffled and of poor quality, but I recognized the voice. It was Pavel. He was speaking in disjointed sentences, as if he were being interrogated. I can't hear the others anymore. The door isn't locked anymore. He just stands in the corner, just staring at me. His voice grew weaker, more slurred. Then there was silence. Then a second voice came in. Masculine, firm, cold. He responded well to isolation. The next one will be harder. Then there was a loud noise and the recording ended. It broke me. My brother had been used. He hadn't disappeared. He had been chosen, tested, silenced. And now, all these years later, it was still silent. But I wouldn't let it go like this. 2 days later, I went to the local press. I took the photos, the notebook, the tape. I showed it all to an investigative reporter named Nedyalko Kamenov. He listened to everything in silence. At the end, he said that he needed time, that it was dangerous, that this could become a political bombshell. But he also said something else. You are not crazy. I have heard rumors about this boarding school before. Now we have proof, but we need more. I accepted the risk. I went back to the boarding school with him, this time during the day, with credentials. We pretended we were doing a story about educational reform. We went in with hidden cameras and microphones. We talked to former employees. Everyone changed the subject, except one. The cleaning lady, the same one who had looked at me with fear weeks before. When Kamenov showed her one of the photos, she shivered. These boys. I saw one of them. Once. Years ago. One night. He was all dirty, barefoot, walking down the hallway. I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't answer. He just looked at me as if he didn't see me. And then, he disappeared behind a door that no longer exists. Kamenov asked where that door was. She pointed to a secluded corner, behind the old laundry room. We went there. The place was locked. But with effort, we managed to force our way in. And there it was. A narrow passage, hidden behind a leaning cupboard. A stone hallway, different from the rest of the building. And at the end of it, a door, one I had never seen before. Dark wood, with symbols carved into it. Not religious, not mystical. They were tally marks, names, dates. Kamenov was filming everything. I approached. The door was locked, but not with a key. It was as if it was waiting for someone to push it. When I touched it, I felt a shiver run down my spine. A presence. Something I couldn't explain. And then my brother's voice echoed in my mind. Not a memory, not a real sound, but a certainty. He had been there, behind that door. Kamenov pulled me back. He said it was too dangerous, that maybe it would be better to get out and process the material. But I couldn't. I couldn't just stop. I had to open up. And when I put my hand on the doorknob, I heard it, clearly, a whisper coming from the other side. Low, almost imperceptible. but real. Elena. My name echoing from that side of the door that seemed to have been forgotten by everyone, except him, paralyzed me. The voice was not imaginary. It was not a memory. It had a weight, a timbre. It was as if I was being called from a place where time does not pass, where life does not flow as it should. Kamenov stepped back. He kept saying that this was beyond the limits of what a journalist could or should record. But I was no longer listening to him. I was there, with my hand on the rough wood, feeling that everything I had experienced in recent years was converging on that moment. I turned the doorknob. It was cold. The door didn't open right away. It resisted, as if it were made not just of wood, but of half-buried memories. I pushed hard, and the creak that followed was like a scream from the past. On the other side, there was no room. There was a tunnel, a narrow, windowless hallway, the floor covered in dust and torn pieces of paper. No light came from within, but the sound was clear. Dripping water, breathing, the sound of a chair scraping the floor farther down. We turned on the flashlight. Kamenov and I walked along together. The corridor opened into small side rooms, without doors, like cells. Inside them were the remains of broken furniture, moldy mattresses, metal boxes with faded labels, and on some of the walls, more drawings, not made with pencil or paint, but with fingernails, distorted faces, scratched names, numbers, always numbers. In the fourth cell, we found something that made my heart stop. A small mural of photos stuck together with old duct tape. Children in uniforms. One of them was Pavel. In the corner of the wall, written in what looked like charcoal, "We are still here." Kamenov took pictures of everything. He was shaking. He asked me to leave. This is enough to bring down half a ministry. But that wasn't enough for me. I had to go all the way. I went all the way to the end of the tunnel. There, a staircase led down to an even deeper level. The structure was made of old bricks, with the plaster falling off, as if it had been built before the boarding school. Something earlier, something hidden from a long time ago. With each step, the air grew colder. The flashlight began to fail. The battery, which had been replaced hours earlier, flickered as if it were draining. We reached an empty room with concrete columns and a low ceiling, and in the center, a chair, solid wood, with leather straps attached to the arms and feet. There were stains on the floor around it, not fresh, but dried, old. On the walls, phrases written in chalk. If you hear, don't answer. If you see, don't look in the eyes. If you remember, they come. Kamenov dropped the camera. He couldn't bear it. He turned and ran up the stairs. I was left alone. And then I heard it again. The voice, louder, clearer. "Elena, get me out of here." I couldn't help myself. I called out to him. "Pavel, it's me. Where are you?" And then, a sound behind me. Like a door had closed by itself. I turned around. There was no one there. But something had changed. The air grew thicker, and a dim light appeared in the corner of the room, like a distant candle. I went over to it. It was a crack, an opening between two slabs of concrete. On the other side, a room. Small, no windows, with an iron bed and a notebook on it. I picked up the notebook. It was covered in dust. I shivered as I opened it. The first page was in Pavel's handwriting. Today is the 15th of November. I think it's the last one. The following pages were written in despair. No punctuation. Words about fear, about voices telling him to be quiet. Descriptions of eyes behind the walls. Phrases repeated like mantras. They hear everything. They are waiting. Pain is the final test. And on the last page, a sentence that made me fall to my knees. If my sister finds this, don't stop. Don't believe anyone. The real door is still closed. I staggered back up. I emerged from the basement as if I had just dived too deep. Kamenov was waiting for me outside, pale-faced, holding the camera in his trembling hands. We left the boarding school without saying a word. We got into the car and drove to the station in complete silence. In the following days, His story was rejected by all the newspapers. Editors said it was sensationalism, that the records were too old, that nothing could be proven with absolute certainty. He received anonymous phone calls. They told him to forget the whole thing. There's a lot of stuff buried there. Leave it as it is if you want to stay alive. But he wouldn't shut up. He published everything on an independent blog. The photos, the audio, the video of the tunnel. The repercussion was immediate. Thousands of hits in just a few hours. Families of the missing began to write. Old ex-employees came forward with new stories. But along with this came the threats. Our apartment was ransacked. The box with the documents disappeared. The blog was taken down. Kamenov disappeared 3 days later. And then, for the first time in a long time, I found myself completely alone. But now I was absolutely certain of one thing. My brother was not dead. Not in the way the world understands death. He was trapped in something. Something that had been happening in this place since before we were even born. And it was not over yet. Because the next day, I received an envelope under the door. No sender, no stamp. Inside it, just a torn sheet of paper from a notebook, with his handwriting. Come back. They left the door ajar. Only you can get me out of here. I held that paper as if it were the last beat of a heart about to stop. The handwriting was his. The way he drew the E's, the crooked accents, the same heavy pressure on the last words of each line. It wasn't a forgery. It was a message. From where? I didn't know. But I couldn't ignore it. Go back. They left the door ajar. I spent the night staring at the envelope, telling myself that it could be a trap, that this could all have been set up to drive me crazy. But it wasn't just fear that held me back. It was the suffocating certainty that Pavel was waiting for me somewhere between oblivion and darkness. Something inside him resisted, and that something called to me. The next day, I went to the boarding school again. I took only my notebook, paper, a new flashlight, and a small camera hidden in the collar of my coat. The school was closed for renovations. I managed to get in through the back, through the same hole in the wall as weeks ago. The courtyard was empty, desolate. Broken glass, crooked railings, old toys covered in dirt. A place where time seemed to have refused to move on. The hallway to the hidden wing seemed longer now. Each step echoed like a countdown. The closet that hid the entrance was still there, but this time it had been pushed aside. Someone had been there after me. The door was ajar, just as the message said, and on the door frame, in black ink, was a hastily written word: run. I descended the stairs carefully. The basement was even colder than before. The beam from the flashlight danced across the walls, revealing cracks I didn't remember seeing. The scribbles grew larger. Faces multiplied, some crossed out, others enlarged. With each step, it seemed as if the eyes were following me. At the end of the corridor, the carved door was still there, but now it was open, wide open, and behind it, the tunnel was no longer the same. Everything looked different, as if the cells had been removed, the paths had been widened, the nightmare had been rebuilt. The architecture was irregular, made of poorly finished concrete, with holes in the corners from which damp steam was escaping. The floor creaked, and in the background, voices, murmurs. Move on. I walked through a series of empty rooms. In one, a row of chairs stood in front of a broken mirror. In another, a radio played static. But as I approached, through the hissing, I heard a low voice. 7. 7 came in. 1 stayed. And then, he still sings at night. The next room knocked me over inside. There were toys scattered about, but not in a natural way. Every doll, every domino, every toy car, they were all arranged in perfectly symmetrical rows, facing the same wall. And on that wall, pictures were stapled together, all in black and white, children in uniforms, faces erased with marker, except for one. Pavel, the only full photo, and below it, a sentence. He still remembers what he shouldn't. Panic hit me like a punch to the gut. I started calling out to him. Pavel, it's me. If you're there, talk to me. My voice echoed through the void. No answer. Just the whispers coming back. Scrambled sentences. Words that didn't fit together. And suddenly, footsteps running behind me. I turned with the flashlight. Nothing. I started running. I no longer knew where I had come from or where I was going. The hallways seemed to move. Doors appeared where there hadn't been before. And the walls, they whispered, with children's voices. Some were crying. Others sang a melody without lyrics. And I ran, until I reached a small, simple wooden door, almost hidden behind a pillar. It was low. I had to bend down to enter. On the other side, a room made of raw bricks. In the center, an iron bed, a chair, and a bookshelf. On it, notebooks were stacked, all the same as Pavel's. I picked up the top one. When I opened it, I saw scribbles, like his. Pages of delirium. Dates. Times. Always the same sequence. Wake up, listen, wait, write down. Then, the phrase repeated at the end of each day. Today, he didn't come. But on the last day, something different. Today, he sat down and called me brother. A creaking sound made me look up. In the corner, there was a torn curtain. Behind it, a hole in the wall. I approached slowly. The smell was acidic, strong, like mold mixed with iron. And then I saw it. A short hallway. And at the end, a boy. Sitting, facing away. The light of the lantern trembled. My body, too. I called out, "Pavel." He didn't move. I took a step, and another. "It's me, Elena. Please, answer me." Then he slowly turned his face. And even with his older face, with his sunken eyes, with his pale skin, I recognized him. It was him, my brother. But the look, that look. He looked at me as if he didn't see me, as if he had never seen me before, as if I were just one more. I stood there, a few feet away from him, feeling my entire body tremble. It was Pavel. His features were there, his dark eyes, the small scar on his eyebrow, the contours of his face that I had known for as long as I could remember. But he seemed out of time, as if the clock inside him had stopped years ago, while the whole world kept turning. His skin was thin, almost transparent. His lips were slightly parted, and his gaze, a gaze without an anchor, floating in a void that did not belong to this world. "Pavel, it's me," I repeated, swallowing hard. "I'm Elena." He blinked, slowly, as if that word, my name, awakened something, or tore away a layer of ice that had coated him inside. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. I took another step. Then he raised a shaking hand, pointing at something behind me. I turned my face away. On the wall was a large circular mark, like an old stained glass window that had been cemented over, but where moisture had now redrawn the edges. And on it, words carved with nails, or something sharp. "The Echo Room. No memory leaves here whole." I looked back at him. "Do you know who I am?" This time, he whispered, almost inaudibly. "Lena." That syllable was like a silent thunderclap inside me, a breaking of all defenses. I knelt beside him, took his hands. They were cold, fragile, but real. "You're alive. You're here. I found you, Pavel. I came for you." He took a deep breath. He looked at me as if trying to remember, as if he were leafing through all the pages of the life he had left behind. "They kept me here, waiting to forget." I tried to pull him up, but he hesitated. "They come when we try to leave, when we try to remember. It doesn't matter. I'm here. I'm going to get you out of here, now." He struggled to his feet. His legs were shaky but steady enough. The tunnel behind us seemed darker, more alive, as if, upon finding my brother, something had awakened in that place. I took his hand, and we began walking back. The voices began softly. Sentences about things we didn't understand. Dates, names. They must forget. She brought back the memory. The memory is the mistake. The walls seemed to pulse with the vibration of the words. And then came the noises, scratching, doors slamming, the sounds of chairs scraping. And finally, Footsteps. First slow, then running. "Don't look back," he said. "Why?" "Because that's what they want." We ran. We ran like two children trying to escape a nightmare that had lasted decades. The rooms flashed by. The figures on the walls seemed to change, to follow. The flashlight's light wavered, but the warmth of his hand told me we were still together. We reached the main hallway, but the door, the one that would take us outside, was closed, locked with chains that hadn't been there before. "The closet," Pavel said, pointing. "Behind it is another passage." We went over there. We began to push the piece of furniture. It creaked. It was heavy. Behind it, as he had said, was an opening. Narrow, full of rubble, but open. We went in. It was an even older tunnel, with wet bricks and a low ceiling. The voices were close now. Very close. And then, the scream. It wasn't human. It was like the sound of something that should never have been born, coming from every direction at once. The tunnel began to shake. Dust fell from the ceiling. We ran, crouched, panting, until we saw the light. The small chink of light that indicated the exit to the backyard. We ran. But when he got there, Pavel stopped. "I can't leave." "Of course you can. We're almost there. Come on." "They trapped me here, with memories that aren't mine. If I leave, they come with me. They take shape." "Pavel, it doesn't matter. You're real. I'm real. We're leaving." But he took a step back. "You need to go. Someone needs to remember. Someone needs to tell. No, you come with me, even if I drag you." He looked at me again, and for the first time he smiled. "You were always the brave one." Then the sound behind us changed. It went from shouting to whispering, then to crying, then to silence. When I looked to the side, he was no longer there. I ran back. I called out to him. Nothing. The tunnel was now empty. No tracks, no marks, no notebook. The exit behind me began to close. Slabs falling. The ceiling giving way. I ran. I went out into the courtyard, coughing, covered in dust. Behind me, everything was collapsing. And when I finally turned around, the boarding school was no more. The entire building had caved in. A cloud of dust covered the sky. And where there had been hallways and doors and horrors, there was only ruin. And I was there, alone, but with his memory inside me. I stood, motionless, in front of what was left of the boarding school. The wind lifted the dust like a veil between me and what was now nothing but rubble. There were no sirens. There were no witnesses. Just me, with my eyes burning and my heart in pieces, trying to understand what had really happened there. Behind me, the world went on in silence. But inside me, everything screamed. The collapse of the building was reported as a structural accident, caused by old leaks and prolonged neglect. No mention of the tunnels, no mention of Pavel, no mention of me. The authorities didn't contact me, nor did the press. No one. It was as if the place had finally achieved what it had always wanted, to disappear. I returned to Plovdiv a few days later. I spent hours locked in my room, staring at the only thing left of it all, the tape with his name on it, torn from one of the photos in the toy aisle. It was the last tangible fragment of Pavel's existence. The notebook was gone, the paper with the message, burned, but that tape still had the smell of the underground. I tried to move on with my life, but something was different now. Little lapses. Sometimes I would wake up and not remember the day before. Sometimes I was sure I had spoken to someone who wasn't there. Voices in the hallway, laughter behind the door. Little things, but constant. And then one night, while I was sorting through an old closet, I found another notebook. Same model, same weight, same smell. The first page was blank, but on the second, it was written in Pavel's handwriting. "You're back. Now it's my turn." The following pages were blank, as if they were waiting, as if they were going to be filled by me. I started having dreams. Dreams where I walked down endless hallways. Dreams where I saw Pavel behind mirrors, saying things I didn't understand. Dreams where a door slowly opened, and I knew I couldn't look inside, but I always did. And then the letters started arriving, addressed to me, but no sender, always with the same content, lists of names, children's names, with dates, with ages, and below, a sentence. They are coming back, and now they know you remember. The world out here is the same. People keep running, living, forgetting. But I've become a living memory, an echo of everything that place tried to bury. I can no longer pretend it was just a dream, or that my brother never existed, because sometimes when everything is silent, I still hear the sound of a chair scraping across concrete, and a hoarse, almost gentle voice saying, "Write, Elena. Write what you saw, before you forget it too." This is the story that no one wanted to publish, that no newspaper had the courage to expose, because it's not just about a boarding school, or about disappearances. It's about memories, and what happens when they no longer find a place in the world. My name is Elena, and I remember what they did to my brother. And if you are reading this, it's because somehow he managed to get out. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next exciting stories. Share it with someone who needs to hear what was hidden for so long. And remember, there are truths that only survive when someone decides to remember.